All right, here we go. Well. Welcome to another episode of Fearlessly Parenting. Today, I have as my special guest Michele Benyo. Michele Benyo is a mom of two. She's a certified grief recovery specialist and early childhood parenting coach, and the founder of Good Grief Parenting. After her 6-year-old son died of cancer, her 3-year-old daughter said, "Mommy, half of me is gone." The heartbreaking statement has defined Michele's life and purpose. Her mission is twofold, moms and dads. It's to help parents through the unimaginable challenges of parenting while grieving the death of a child, and to help parents meet the unique needs of a child who has lost a sibling in their early childhood years. The desire of Michelle's heart is to see families live forward after loss toward a bright future with possibilities and even joy. So, without further ado, here's Michele Benyo. Michele, thank you for being on my podcast. It's good to see you, good to talk to you.
Thank you, Stan. It's really good to be here. I'm glad to have this chance to chat with you.
So, Michele, I see that there's great need for what you do. Death is something that all of us will experience one way or the other ourselves, but
Mhm.
our friends and family and siblings and children, uh, hey, there comes a time where we're all called home. And when that person goes home, the people that are left, there's grief, pain of loss. And so what you do has great benefit to people.
Yes. hmm
So tell my audience a little bit about yourself. And I know I read a little bit about your bio to my parents and guardians, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and why you do what you do.
Okay. Well, before my son got sick, I was an early childhood parent educator. That was sort of my third career that I embarked on after I became a mom in my mid 30s. And in Minnesota, every school district has early childhood family education to help parents be the best parents they can be in those early childhood, very developmental years. So I loved this. I had two young children. Every day I got to be with families of young children. Um, and I knew a lot about child development and was learning a lot about child development in those early years. But I was not at all prepared for what a family endures when they experience what happened to me very soon, when my daughter was actually only 15 months old and her
Mm,
brother was 4.5. And that was that he was diagnosed with cancer. And we had a 2.5 year journey with cancer. Um, Suddenly, this perfect family that I had was faced with something that totally disrupted my children's carefree childhood and disrupted my experience as a parent. I didn't know how to do
without a
this.
doubt. Mm,
Um, and when he died, and my daughter said to me, "Mommy, half of me is gone," I
wow.
I knew in a very real sense that that was a true statement because I knew about just the depth of the sibling bond in early childhood, in those formative years where my two children spent all of their time together. Her brother was there from the moment she arrived, and they were very, very close, and then he was gone. So this was a daunting, any family who has lost a loved one knows how it changes your world. But when you lose a young
Right.
child, it steals all of your dreams, all of your imaginings about what your
Yeah, what
family was
could have
supposed to
been?
be.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, it was just a huge loss of dreams. And then, I was listening to your previous interview with, oh, I Nuttall was her last name. I'm sorry to
Yes,
remember.
Mandy Nuttall. Yes,
Yes,
she's
Mandy.
a
Yes, I was.
she's a wonderful lady. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
And she made the statement when her little one was diagnosed with cancer. She made the statement that that there were people who understood that it was the rest of the family in many ways that needed that support because they were sort of invisible. And
Mhm.
that is the case with child loss and siblings that remain. I'm so glad that she didn't lose her daughter. I lost my son, and then my daughter was experiencing this depth of grief that nobody saw. People see the bereaved parents' loss. People say losing a child must be the worst thing you can endure, and I think in many ways it is certainly one of the worst things you
Without
can
a doubt.
endure. But people really didn't think a lot about what it did to my daughter, and so her articulating that to me was just, left me with no doubt that this was a very deep and would be a lifelong loss for her, and I needed to figure out how to help her through this. And so I thought, well, I'm in this field. I'm ahead of a lot of parents because I'm in the field of early childhood education. I can find the resources. I can do this. But Stan, I didn't find any resources.
Mm.
And I should say this was actually 20 years ago. My daughter is now 25. I learned going through this journey of helping her heal that I really needed to get our family through this before I was able to step into it with other families. But I knew at the very beginning when I couldn't find the resources that I
No
was going to have to
instructional manual.
yeah, I was gonna have to create them for when I just figured out how to do this, I was gonna need to share it. So that's what I'm doing now with Good Grief Parenting. It's not just about the loss of the child, it really is about living forward, especially helping young children live forward in the presence of grief after the loss of a sibling.
I love how you talk about living forward,
Yes.
not living in the past,
Mhm.
but in the present, living into that future, living into the next day, because you can't change the past.
Right.
All you can do is work in the moment. Today is present for you. Today is relative, and then to move forward out from where you are into the next day to move forward. I love how you're talking about that. And moms and dads and guardians, you see, parenting doesn't come with an automatic manual. Your child's born and all of a sudden a manual appears before you how to deal with everything.
Mhm.
But every parent, if God gave you a child, you have the ability. He's placed within you the ability to look after, see after that child if you choose to do so. And what Michele did, she said, "Hey, here's my daughter. She's grieving. She's less than 3. How do I help my daughter out?" And she went out and found a way. Moms and dads, I always say this because I want to be an encouragement to you.
Mhm.
There is a way forward. And then when you learn and you find a way, do what Michele is doing right now. Share it with other people so they don't have to go through some of the same arduous steps that you had to go through. So, Michele, let me ask you, uh, how is your work with Grieving Families unique? I've had a guest on several months ago who talked about grieving, but I'd like to hear your perspective. How is your work with Grieving Families unique?
Thank you for asking that because it really is unique, I found. I still do not see anything out there that was what I was looking for 20 years ago. And so I've created that. And what is unique about it is the recognition that a sibling, even a very young sibling, especially a very young sibling, experiences very deep grief and a sense of loss that will stay with them for a lifetime. There have been more studies since I started looking about the impact of losing a sibling. Much of it is for older children, my focus is on young children because they're often overlooked. And I asked some of my clients, what they got from me that they didn't get from others, because they often
Mm.
tell me that they do. And I said, what is it exactly? And they said, you really focus on the child and the parent at the same time. And that's really important because um, many grief support sources that are out there will have a parent component and maybe a child component. I help the parent deal with their own grief and recognize and understand, because it's more than dealing with grief. It's really understanding. I call my business Good Grief Parenting, because grief is good. We don't feel that it is, but it's actually how we heal. And the best way to grieve is just to allow it and go through it. And so it really is good. It's healing. But parents need to understand that before they can help their child. So what I do is really twofold. It's helping parents understand and cope with and grow through their own grief, so that they can give that to their children. And it's beyond the point of loss. It's growing up through all the developmental stages, when a child's going to get new understandings of that void, that loss in their lives, have new ways of processing it, thinking about it, new questions. How does the parent deal with this as the child grows up in that presence of grief? And so I really look at the whole picture in a way that I don't know of anyone else who does that, taking families from the point of loss that is so devastating through all of the touch points in the years ahead, where they'll bump into grief because it doesn't go away. It
No,
it
no.
remains. We live with it, and we can enjoy life, and we can have bright possibilities and even joy, but we're going to bump into it. It's always going to be there. And how do we cope with it? The other piece of it is that I help parents have confidence in themselves, because so
Mm.
many people tell us how to grieve or not to grieve, or you should be doing this. I really intentionally say living forward versus moving forward, because the idea is that you live fully, you
Wow, that
discover a
sounds good.
way to
Love that.
embrace life. Yes, not just put one foot in front of the other. We start that way, but eventually we really figure out that we can enjoy life again and we can live forward. So I take families on that journey to being able to see good things in front of them for their family, in spite of this devastation that is the loss of a loved one, particularly a child.
Well, let me break down what you're saying and unpack it a little bit.
Mhm,
Uh, you know, parents, in order for you to be the example in your house, because remember, mom's, dad's guardian, you're the chief role model.
mhm.
So what Michelle's talking about here is you making sure that you deal with it yourself, and she can help you with that. It's important that we get ourselves ready, that we work on ourselves so that we can lead our child.
Mhm.
And so parents, you heard me say this before. It's like being on an airplane and the mask drop. You got to put the mask on yourself
Yes.
first before you put the mask on your child. And so I also hear you talk about making connections. John Maxwell says everybody communicates, but very few connect. So
Yes.
you're connecting parent with child. You're both going through the process together, working through it together, and that creates a positive connection. It can be positive if you work in a positive way. And then
Exactly.
another thing that I hear you say is that don't run away from it and get in some type of false comfort zone. Because as you said, that hurt, that loss never goes away.
Mhm.
But the sooner you deal with it, the better off you are. So don't
Yes.
hide away from it. Again, you're the chief role model. Deal with it up front. If
Mhm.
you don't know how, get some help, because there's wonderful people out here like Michele. And I'm going to have contact information to her in the podcast description so that, hey, you can reach out to her. Maybe somebody who's hearing my voice right now, you're going through grief, loss of a child, loss of a loved one, and you need a little help. Hey, go to the podcast description. You're going to find a link to Michele's website. But save this information because, hey, Lord willing, the creek don't rise. This won't happen in the near future to any parent. We don't want any parent to lose a child, but if you do, Michele is here to help you. And there are also a lot of wonderful parenting coaches all through the country that are willing to help you also. So now, Michele, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna, I really want to reinforce what you said about connection,
Mhm.
because one of the things that we, especially with young children, don't always do is connect when we're experiencing grief. And it's because we don't want to uh, upset the child. We want to protect the child from this really tough thing that's happening in the family. But the child feels it with every cell of their being, and they know there's something going on. And when we don't connect with them, they imagine things that are worse for them, that are really, they lose their sense of security, their sense of understanding. They really need parents to be honest with them, and they need for parents to reinforce the value of the living child. And so that connection with your living child is so important. And much of what I do in my program is really just teaching, equipping parents with the skills to connect with their child when things are tough and they don't know how. I can tell you, you need to connect with your child, and you can want to connect with your child. But if no one tells you how, you don't know how to do that. It doesn't come naturally to us. So I provide those tools and those how-tos that are really just good parenting for any parent, um, and help you to connect with that child so that you all grow up and grow through your loss healthy. And that is the whole foundation of good grief parenting.
So, little transition here. You talked a little bit about this, and I'm going to ask you to expound on it a little bit more. What do adults like myself and the moms and dads and guardians out there, what do they need to know specifically about how a little child grieves? That kindergartner through fifth grader who is going through this devastating loss
Mm-hmm.
without any idea of how to deal with it. What specifically should parents keep in mind when dealing with a child in this type of situation?
Mm-hmm. And I want to even go younger, Stan,
Okay,
because I let me just give you an example,
please.
another example from my daughter. She was 15 months old when her brother
Mm,
was diagnosed, and we were a family of four. And the first night that my son was in the hospital, his dad was with him, and I was home with my daughter. And she started wandering around the house, upstairs and downstairs, to the garage door, to her brother's bed. She was just wailing. She was making an inhuman sound. I was not a wreck. I was pretty in control. She was feeling everything our family was
mm,
experiencing, every cell of her body. And I would go and try to hold her and comfort her, and she'd push me away and throw herself on the floor. She
wow.
was 15 months old. I was just alarmed by this. There was nothing I could do for her. But between that experience with her and her articulation at the age of 3.5, that half of me is gone, I know that those very young children also need for us to talk to them. So my advice to families is to talk to this child and say, "Oh, you're really missing your brother and your dad right now. It's kind of scary what's been going on, what you're feeling right now. It doesn't
Mm.
feel good, does it?" Giving them words for what they're experiencing, just acknowledging
Yeah,
it.
acknowledging those babies.
Yes,
Listen,
yes,
actually, not just hearing them, but you're listening to them and
yes,
articulating what you hear.
yes. Yes,
Mm.
and asking them. I mean, in her case, she was feeling it, I could see it, I just needed to be there for her, just sometimes just holding them and being there with them, acknowledging it, saying, "Mommy's really worried too, but we're gonna be okay. I'm here with you." The things they need to know, that what they're feeling is normal and natural, understanding that the situation is their reactions are justified. The adult does understand it. We can't make them feel better. We
No,
can't do that with grief and loss. We can only be there with them, acknowledge that it feels bad. I have a good grief guide on my website that gives
okay.
adults some actual kind of verbiage for ways to deal with, a child being sad, as opposed to what we typically do, which is try to make them feel better when we really can't. Um, but that just being willing to admit that, yes, there's something going on here that's hard with a child, is really empowering for them. We don't have to have the answers. We don't have the answers, but we want to reinforce their reality. And
Absolutely.
yes.
You know, parents and guardians, we'll make sure to have a link to that particular resource up
Mm-hmm.
in there. But what Michelle's getting to is what I call that that's right. When you're speaking to your child, and again, you can't make it go away. It's
Right.
happening.
Mm-hmm.
And if your child passes, they pass. You can't undo that. But you can speak to your child and listen to what they have to say and repeat some things back to them, ask some, you know, uh, the necessary questions so that they know
Mm-hmm.
that you're understanding them to where you get something akin to, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling.
Yes.
That,
Yes.
that's what I'm going through, mommy. That's what I'm going through, daddy.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you have truly made the connection. Until you get that's right, you kind of going back and forth. But
Yes.
when you getting
Yes.
down on their level and listening
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
repeating back what you hear so that you get that eventual that's right or that right moment.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So
The other thing I wanna say, you asked what adults should know. You should know that a child, so often adults say, "Well, they seem like they're doing okay, so I don't wanna bother them." Children process difficult things like loss and grief through play. So they may be playing, they may be looking like they're okay, but I guarantee you, if there's something traumatic and difficult going on in your family, it's going on in your child too, no matter what they look like. So don't make the mistake of thinking they look okay, so we're just not gonna talk about it. I think
that's
that's one
really
of the most
profound.
important things for parents to recognize, is that kids don't express grief the way adults do. We don't necessarily see it in them,
Or
but
grief
they
or a lot of
experience
other things that they go through.
it.
That's
Mhm.
so profound. Here, moms and dads play. Play is a child's work. I work
Yes.
in the Royal Ranger Ministry, and if I get a new leader, I put them in charge of recreation, and they kind of look at me and say, "You put me in charge of the play." I said, "Listen, if you want to find out what's going on with these boys," I said, "this is not just I got you here babysitting or recreation or a game something. I want you to watch how they play
Mhm.
because the way they play will tell you a lot about what's going on in their life. And you can ask
Yes.
God to show you things, and you'll see things in their play that you can then in turn address and speak to. And everybody who's ever done that has come back and go, wow,
Mm-hmm.
their play tells me a lot. So moms and dads, hear Michele on this. She she is speaking truth. So in wrapping up here, give us 3 ways parents can best support their grieving child. I know you talked about making a connection and listening, but again, 3 points that parents can best use to support their grieving child.
Okay. Well, the first, I want to reinforce some things that I said. The first thing is really kind of recognizing that grief is not something to shy away from, and then to take care of yourself. Be sure you don't neglect your own self-care, because if you are not taking care, it is that oxygen mask analogy. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're not, first of all, you're not in the best shape to take care of your child. You're also not being a good role model for them. You want to model for them that this is how we take care of ourselves when we're going through this. And it's okay to call upon the help that you need. Again, I know you've had other guests talk about the importance of accepting help when you're in a situation like this. Conversation would be the second thing, not being afraid to talk to the child about what's going on. And further, not being afraid to use the actual words. We say people passed away, passed on. To a child, that means nothing. It's actually kind of confusing. The actual word, the accurate word, is that our loved one died. They are dead. And when we use that word with our child, we're giving them concrete information. They can't interpret it some other way. Granted, a young child may not understand fully what death is, but they're still getting the accurate word, and we tell them their body stopped working. We don't need to be any more complicated than that with a child. What does it mean when something dies? Anything that's living will die, whether it's a plant, whether it's that caterpillar that you wanted to keep as a pet, whether it's your grandpa or your sibling. People die and things die when they stop working. They can no longer do what they could do when they were living. That's what death is. And we can help kids understand that. There are lots of ways in day to day where we have experiences where we can help kids understand that something died, and not be afraid to use that word, because it has a very specific meaning that they can then understand. And the third thing I would say is simply to honor grief in all of its forms. Another story that I share, because I say we all experience grief for the first time in childhood. We all do. And what our parents did with that grief is what we learned and what we pass on. My first experience of grief that I remember, I was probably about 5, and I was at the beach with Wally the walrus, a blow-up toy that I could ride on. And I grew up in northern Minnesota on Lake of the Woods, so it was this huge lake that went off into the horizon. I fell off of Wally. He scooted away from me. The wind took him away. People who could swim couldn't reach him. I had to stand on the beach and watch Wally the walrus float and float and float to the horizon. And I felt this pit. He was gone. I was never going to be able to ride him or play with him again. It was grief. Now, if that happened to me today, would I feel grief? No, he would be just a toy. But for me as a 5-year-old, for an adult to say, oh, he's just a toy, we'll get you something else, that doesn't help me to learn how to cope with
Cut it,
grief.
because that's a
Right,
teaching opportunity. That's a
right,
teaching opportunity.
exactly.
Things like this are going to happen.
Yes, exactly. So that's what I mean by honoring grief. A child's grief can be all kinds of simple things. We just need to help them understand, yes, we lost something we didn't want to lose. Something is gone. That doesn't feel good. That's a horrible feeling. And then how do we cope with that, and how do we live forward? How do we go on? So those would be my three things: take care of yourself, be able to have clear, open, doesn't need to be complex. Don't give a child more than they can understand, but have some really clear ways that you talk with them about death and loss, and then honor grief in whatever way they experience it, so that they learn that grief is a fact of life, and we cope with it, we live beyond it, and we enjoy life going forward.
Oh, let me tell you, moms and dads, Michele has touched on something here that a lot of my guests has touched on. Take care of yourself, because if you get run down and you get into a position to where you can barely take care of yourself, how are you going to take care of yourself? You need to take care of yourself. You need to invest in yourself so that you can become the best version of yourself. And moms and dads, when you're the best version of yourself, whether it's leadership and learning leadership and pass that on to your child, or going through a very difficult time and role modeling your child how to go through a difficult circumstance. Again, you got to take care of yourself. You got to get the knowledge so that you can go through it, so that your child can watch you, and they are always watching, so that they learn too how to go through a difficult situation. And you don't get much more difficult than having to deal with grief over the loss of a loved one. Well, Michele, I want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart. You touched on a subject that every last one of us is going to have to deal with, and you have done so with excellence. Now, maybe that's because you're from Minnesota. Now, I'm a Texan. My wife is from Minnesota.
Oh, well then.
And what was that lake there that you were talking about?
Lake of the Woods is up in
Woods.
northern Minnesota. It's on the border between Canada and Minnesota, and it's a huge lake. Yes.
Well, I'm going to talk with her about that, and also that I had an exceptional guest here today. Well, moms, dads, guardians, that's all that we have for you for this particular episode. But I want to challenge you, like I always do, to go forth and fearlessly parent. God bless. And we're out.
Thank you. Thank you, Stan.
Hey, you're more than welcome. So, Lake of the Woods, huh?
Yeah. So where is your wife from?